To introduce our guest speaker. Our guest speaker is Miriam Wright. She is in front of me and behind me on the big screen here. Miriam Wright is an associate professor of history at the University of Windsor. She teaches Canadian history, and her recent work has focused on race and sports in Canada, as well as on Chinese immigration to Newfoundland and Labrador. Miriam is one of the researchers behind the award-winning Breaking the Color Barrier, Wilfred Boomer Harding, and the Chatham Colored All-Stars Project. Her new book, released by Wilfrid Laurier University Press in the fall of 2023, is Sporting Justice, the Chatham Colored All-Stars and Black Baseball in Southwestern Ontario, 1915 to 1958. Please welcome Miriam Wright.
Well, this talk today comes from my book there. You can see it there. Sporting Justice, the Chatham Colored All-Stars and Black Baseball in Southwestern Ontario, 1915 to 1958. Chatham Colored All-Stars, in case you don't know that story, they were a Black men's baseball team from Chatham, Ontario in the 1930s. In 1934, when sports, like many aspects of Southern Ontario society, were largely racially segregated, the All-Stars became the first Black team, and I believe only Black team, to win a provincial championship. Let's picture the team there. Let's see. There, okay. Okay. Okay, there were very few Black teams in organized baseball in that time, and even fewer playing in leagues affiliated with the province-wide body, the Ontario Baseball Amateur Association. As a Black team, the All-Stars experienced firsthand the indignities of hostile crowds yelling late racist slurs, questionable calls, and getting turned away from hotels and restaurants. After a grueling four playoff rounds and a final three-game series. Sorry, I've just got some linking issues here. Okay. Grueling baseball round. Sorry. After grueling four playoff rounds and a final three-game series during a cold October, they brought the championship trophy back to Chatham. They continued playing throughout the 1930s, reaching the playoffs twice more before they disbanded at the end of the 1940 season. After that, the former team members moved on to primarily white community teams, effectively integrating baseball in Chatham. They also supported new Black Chatham teams in the 1940s and 1950s. And as a gentleman mentioned earlier, I actually came to this project over 8 years ago when I happened to meet the wonderful Patricia Harding, daughter-in-law of the late Wilfred Boomer Harding. Wilfred Harding is the gentleman in the back row, second from the right. So along with colleagues at the University of Windsor, in partnership with the Chatham Sports Hall of Fame and the Chatham Kent Black Historical Society, we developed a website and oral history project launched in 2017. In the years since, the impact of the story has continued to grow in Chatham and beyond. And in fact, in 2022, Chatham Colored All-Stars were inducted into the Canadian Sports Hall of Fame, and that was a really exciting moment for us. Pictures on the left are three sons of former players. Far left is Blake Harding, son of Wilfred Boomer Harding. Gentleman in the middle is Don Tabron Jr. His father, Don Tabron, was one of two men from Detroit who played on this team, him and someone named Denise Washington. And of course, on the far right, you'll probably recognize Fergie Jenkins Jr. His father, Fergie Jenkins Sr., played on this team from 1935 through 1939 and 1940. And of course, you also may know of the connection between the Chatham Rotary Club and Fergie Jenkins. The main baseball diamond in Chatham is called Fergie Jenkins Field, and it is in, of course, Rotary Park. In fact, that is the same field where the Chatham Colored All-Stars played their championship games. They played their regular season games over in Sterling Park nearby, but the big, the championship games were in that park. Now, it wasn't called Rotary Park back then. I don't believe that Rotary was involved with it at that time, but they have been subsequently. Okay, both my colleagues at the University of Windsor, Heidi Jacobs and I, have recently published books on this story, each with a different focus. Heidi's explores the All-Stars during their 1934 championship season, while mine is a broader social history of the All-Stars and Black baseball in southwestern Ontario. This includes a wide network of baseball teams and players, ranging from Chatham, Buxton, London, Windsor, and Detroit, in a time period from World War I up to the 1950s. As a social historian, I wanted to place the Chatham Cod All-Stars and other Black baseball teams in a larger context, linking them to their families, communities, and regional networks. Baseball, in a sense, became a window to look at some of the ways that Black people in this area faced, responded to, and sometimes resisted the racist inequalities that were embedded in the larger society. So today I wanted to share some of those stories to give you some insights into why baseball and sports in general were so important to historic Black communities in this area. And I know that Rotary International has a long history of support of community and community sports, so I thought that this story might resonate with you. So I'll begin by talking about families. The foundation of baseball was the family, and in various oral history interviews we did, the family connections came up again and again. Pauline Williams, who was a niece of Chatham Cod All-Stars members Hoyle and Stanton Robbins of Buxton, Ontario, spoke about their mother and her aunts and uncles who all played ball together. She said, the girls always played with the boys, remarking that her mother, she would be up there too. She was a left-hander, and so she would always be up there playing with them. In fact, her mother and her aunts also played softball. In fact, this is a picture of the Buxton softball team. There were girls' teams in, I know, Chatham and London, as well as Buxton. I'm not aware of one in Windsor, but maybe someday we'll find out about that as well. Another family with baseball in the blood were the Hardings of Chatham's East End neighborhood. Beulah Harding, older sister of three of the Chatham Cod All-Stars, Len, Boomer, and Andy, claimed, quote, baseball was our breakfast, dinner, and supper. That generosity also extended to other non-relatives. Younger sister Wanda Harding said, the side door was always open for anyone Len or Boomer brought home. And we can see this familial ties even more strongly when looking at the intergenerational family relationships on the teams. In 1933 and 1934, the Chatham Cod All-Stars team had 3 pairs of brothers and several cousins playing on it. And over 3/4 of the members of that team also had fathers, uncles, older brothers, and cousins on earlier Chatham and Buxton teams from the 1910s and the 1920s. This is indeed an intergenerational story. Baseball was also central to community life, and we know that Black people in southwestern Ontario had made baseball part of their gatherings since at least the late 19th century. Picnics and celebrations such as Emancipation Day usually featured ball games. These gatherings were also a vital part of community building, an important source of identity and solidarity in the face of systemic racism. When barriers are blocked to wider social and economic participation in society, these times together in a park on a sunny afternoon were vital. Ed Wright, who grew up in Chatham in the 1940s and 50s and went on to have a career as a coach in NCAA hockey in the United States, recalled those Sunday afternoon games when the Chatham Panthers, a Black team from the 1950s, used to play. He said it was an event for the older folk. He said, hey, the Panthers are playing over at Sterling Park. Come on over and watch the game. See the neighborhood boys playing, end quote. Even into the 1950s, when racism continued to keep Black people out of many public spaces, these community ball games were important. Baseball was also part of the network of Black communities throughout the region. From early times, Black baseball teams from Buxton, Chatham, London, and Windsor would get together and play with each other, making it a social time with picnics and dances added in. Black teams from Chatham and London had particularly close relationships in the 1920s and 1930s, when they would frequently take trips up and down Old No. 2 Highway to play in each other's home parks. While these were social times, being able to connect with people in other communities, perhaps to find work or a place to live, could make a difference in their lives. Beulah Harding, for example, older sister of 3 of the Chatham Cod All-Stars players, spoke about being friends with some of the families of the London players when she moved to that city to go to Teachers College in the late 1920s. For a young Black woman on her own in London, having those connections, those points of contact would have been important. Another example example, Wilfred's younger brother, Boomer Harding, said in an oral history interview in 1980 that one of the London players, whose name was Herbert Wilson, used to come out and watch him while Harding was on a London Army hockey team during World War II. He said Wilson would sit in the stands and give him the signal to go get him while he was playing. As you can imagine, a lone Black man playing on a hockey team in 1943 could have used all the support he could get. And the fact that Harding remembered and spoke about what might seem like a small thing suggests how important these connections were. Besides providing a foundation for family, community, and regional relationships, baseball also provided greater visibility for Black people in the wider community. Although not included in organized white leagues in the 1920s or earlier, Black people from Chatham, Buxton, and London formed teams and played exhibition games, emulating the American Black touring teams that often played in the area. The Chatham Colored Giants, formed around 1915, were most active in the 1920s. They recruited some talented players from London, including Harry Coursey, the first Black man to play with what became the London Majors in the Intercounty Baseball League in 1926. I'll just take a picture. Actually, that's it. All-Stars. I'll come back to that picture in a few minutes. And here is actually a picture of the London team. I don't have a picture of the Giants, but I do have a picture of the London team. Several of those players played in Chatham. The Giants helped build the profile of Black baseball even more when they began inviting Black teams from Detroit to Chatham to play. These were big events and attracted wider audiences, as well as the attention of the local press. A reporter called one game between the Giants and a Detroit team in 1925 as, quote, the best exhibition of amateur ball seen in this vicinity for years. It took boldness and initiative to organize those games, holding them in the city's biggest baseball diamond and putting notices in the paper, inviting the public to come watch. By building a profile for Black baseball, the Giants and other Black teams made a claim to legitimacy, a right to be there. Indeed, that visibility continued into the 1930s when area Black teams were finally invited to join local white amateur leagues in southwestern Ontario. They included teams from London. There was a team sponsored by Hotel London, the Chatham Colored All-Stars, which was formed in 1933, and a team from Windsor, pictured here, called the Windsor Colored Stars, which played out of Weigel Park in the historic Black neighborhood known as the McDougall Street Corridor. Now, we don't know the full reason for the change. I suspect the flagging fortunes of white organized baseball at the height of the Great Depression was a factor. I also believe that the earlier Black teams had laid the groundwork, helping to normalize and develop an interest in Black baseball. While all three teams were talented with strong players, only one, the Chatham Colored All-Stars, was able to continue to compete for a provincial championship. The London team was disbanded in 1934 after the team's sponsor, Hotel London, fired its Black employees and ended their support for the team. The Windsor Colored Stars played in city leagues throughout the 1930s, but never played in a league affiliated with the Ontario Baseball Amateur Association, OBAA. Local sports writers spoke highly of the Windsor team, with one describing them, quote, one of the busiest and most capable aggregations in the district, end quote. And their star pitcher, Jim Pettiford of Sandwich, as, quote, one of the best all-around players in Essex County, end quote. Again, I don't know the reason, but I suspect they did not have the social capital or influence to get into the more elite leagues. But it is a reminder, however, of the challenges that Black teams faced. Another reason that looking at Black baseball in this region is important is that through sport, the players could begin to assert themselves in a public forum. After playing together for a number of years, the Chatham Colored All-Stars became more confident, independent, and publicly vocal. Sports historians have long drawn a relationship between sport and social justice. Besides providing a source of pride for marginalized communities, sport provided a space for Black players to interact with and compete with white athletes, offering, as sports historian Rob Ruck notes, quote, a forum for symbolic political assertion and an arena for real political struggle, end quote. In their early years as a team and as neophytes in the OBAA, the All-Stars relied more heavily on local white baseball organizers to help them deal with problems and conflicts. But the later 1930s, however, the All-Stars relied less on white allies and were increasingly advocating for themselves, more willing to challenge decisions that went against them or speak out against unfair and racist treatment. Boomer Harding, in a 1980 interview, remarked that, quote, baseball played off the field is very different from the one played on the field, end quote. So perhaps with experience and inside advice, they used it to navigate that world more confidently. Also, I expect some of this confidence came from their continued success and influence in regional baseball throughout the 1930s. After they won the 1934 championship, the All-Stars were invited into a more competitive league comprised of top teams from southwestern Ontario, including teams from London, Sarnia, and Strathroy. The All-Stars did very well in this circuit, winning the regional title in 1935 and coming in second in 1936, giving them an even higher regional profile. By the late 1930s, the All-Stars leaders were more visible, advocating for the team, and most significantly, they were speaking directly to the local press, making sure that their side of the story was heard. And I can't emphasize how important that was. At a time when Black people were expected to accept the racist order of things and remain silent, this team was saying in public, we deserve to be treated fairly, even if just on the baseball field. They used the press to their advantage in the tumultuous 1939 season, when the team came into conflict with both the Chatham City Baseball League and the Ontario Baseball Association. Both disputes were over being treated fairly and equitably, and in both cases, the All-Stars went to the Chatham Daily News to get their side of the story to the public. After challenging an officiating decision made by the Chatham City League, All-Stars manager Len Harding wrote an open letter about their complaint, which the newspaper published. Later that season, in a dispute with the Ontario Baseball Association over travel and compensation for travel in the final playoff series, Harding again went to the press. Quote, all we ask is a little fairness, end quote, he said, as he called on the public to support them. His public relations move also sparked commentary from newspaper sports writers from across Southern Ontario, which led the Ontario Baseball Association to make partial concessions to the aggrieved team. Though the All-Stars did not get their complaint fully resolved, there was a powerful symbolism in a Black team in that time, in that place, saying publicly they deserved to be treated fairly. Oral histories of former team and family members reflect some of those values, showing strength and resistance in the face of racism. A book published some years ago featuring oral histories from the American South called Remembering Jim Crow recalled, quote, the extraordinary resilience of Black citizens who, individually and collectively, found ways to endure, fight back, and occasionally define their own destinies, end quote. Interviews of former members of the Chatham Cloud All-Stars reveal similar themes. Boomer Harding spoke admiringly about the way that his teammate, Earl Flat Chase, and Earl Flat Chase is in the back row in that picture, far right, the way that he pushed back against game officials who wouldn't call a runner out when he had tagged them at second base. Harding explained that if Chase just lightly tapped the player, the official would ignore him and call the runner safe. So to make a point, Harding said Chase would make it clear that he got the runner out, tagging the runner forcefully before he even got to the bag. Harding added, however, that, quote, we only played what the referees and umpires made us play, end quote, suggesting the physicality of their play was a response to unfair officiating. Harding's teammate, third baseman Kingsley Turrell, expressed a similar admiration for their catcher, Donese Washington. He was one of the players from Detroit. He said Washington, quote, wasn't a rough guy, but nobody tried to rough him up because he stood his ground, end quote. He stood his ground, something he could do on the baseball diamond, if not always in everyday life. Indeed, Turrell suggested Washington carried this confidence that came from a sense of who he was, saying, quote, and he let everybody know, wherever we played baseball, that he was our catcher, end quote. That he remembered the confidence and strength that he saw in Washington and wanted to share it suggests both the social and emotional power of sport. These same themes appear in the later interviews that we did with the Chatham Code All-Stars family members, where the children of the players spoke about watching their elders demand and command respect in their everyday lives. Similarly, people describing the Black Chatham teams from the 1950s remember them as competent, respectable, community-minded men who, quote, stood their ground in the face of racist treatment. These oral histories are valuable, not only for providing insight into how people saw and experienced baseball, but what it tells us about the speakers themselves, their values, their strategies, their reflections on what it's like growing up in a place where Black people faced many barriers. The flashes of pride, The expressions of identity found in these interviews offer insights as well into the resilience of the human spirit and the way that ordinary people made history. As the Chatham Cloud All-Stars were gaining confidence and becoming more vocal and visible, others in the community and around the region were seeking wider social change. While I'm not aware of any members of the Chatham Cloud All-Stars being directly involved in civil rights activism, they were most certainly connected to people who were. And they would have been well aware of what was happening around them in nearby communities. As noted by your very own Irene Moore Davis, in 1930s Windsor, a Black organization, the Central Citizens Association, was calling on local white businesses in the city of Windsor to hire Black people. The churches were another source of activism in the spread of ideas, particularly as visiting ministers from the U.S. often came to speak at Black churches in the border region. At Chatham's Emancipation Day celebrations in 1939, for example, clergymen from the BME Church in North Buxton and the First Institutional Baptist Church of Hamtramck in Detroit spoke to the crowd about the need for Black people to come together for greater civil and economic rights. Reverend Benjamin H. Wright of Hamtramck affirmed, quote, "The demand of the colored man today is for justice," end quote. I don't know if members of the Chatham Cloud All-Stars were at that Emancipation Day celebration, but these messages were in the churches and in the community where they lived. When a ball team stood up to demand fair treatment, they weren't doing so from a vacuum. They were from the community, from a network of communities where these ideas and assertions were already established and modeled. This history of the Chatham Cloud All-Stars and Black baseball speaks to the transformative power of sport, the resilience of community, and the ordinary ways that Black people, both on and off the baseball field, worked for change. So I think I will leave it there to leave time for questions. Just one more note, just a couple of more pictures here. This is a team from the 1950s, the Chatham Panthers. And there are actually a couple of fellows from Windsor who played on this team, Lauren Foster and A.B. Scott. And a couple of the sons of Earl Flatt Chase also played on this team, Earl Chase Jr. and Horace Chase. And finally, yes, if you're interested in copies of the book, you can either get them at local bookstores or you can get them online through the Wilfrid Laurier University Press website. And there's a discount code that is good until the end of February, SJ0124. So if you just go to the Wilfrid Laurier website, look for my book or type in my name, you'll find it. So thank you very much.
Any questions? I do have one. The Black baseball players from that time in the States, they would play in the Negro Leagues. Did any of the colored stars, colored team, did they go and play in the Negro Leagues in the States?
Well, just one. That's Don Tabron Sr. Remember at the beginning I showed you a picture of those of the three sons of the Chatham Cloud All-Stars, the guy in the middle. His father did play, like he played I think it was I think the Brown Bombers. There's a Detroit team like in the late 30s. The 30s, the Negro Leagues were having some financial problems, and so the teams were kind of folding and reforming and all that kind of thing. And he did play briefly in one of those leagues, but he was American to begin with. None of the Canadians ever played in the Negro Leagues.
Yeah, John.
Yeah, I was just curious, as there's technical advances and advances and more information becoming available, is you finding it easier to find more historical information, or has the passage of time made it more difficult where you lose connection with people that have all this information? I'm just wondering how difficult it is to get information on things that happened.
Sure, yeah. Yeah, well, certainly the one sort of main source that was really important to us was the oral histories. And that is something that is getting harder to find. as soon as we sort of connected with the Harding family and the Chatham Kent Black Historical Society, they said, we need to do oral history interviews because the people who remember these players are themselves quite elderly, and soon those stories are going to disappear altogether. So we did we hired students and we interviewed about 16, 17, 18 people who talked about their stories, about their memories of their fathers and uncles and cousins and so on. So that was very, very important. And it was actually important that we did it then, like we did it 2016, 2017, because a number of people that we interviewed who were in their 90s have all passed away. Those stories would have been lost altogether if we hadn't done that. So that is, time is one of the big things. You've got all the technology in the world, but time is the one that's going to cause problems. Other sources we use, like newspaper sources, I mean, they're all microfilms. They're not that hard to get. And actually with ancestry, it's actually easier to do sort of genealogical research. So I actually was able to do a lot, find the various connections with the families and look at sort of their earlier history by looking at those stories on ancestry. So that's actually been quite useful.
Ed's got a question.
Yeah, any questions on Zoom? And
I have a question.
Bob has a question.
When the team won the championship, did the greater community of Chatham come out in full support? And did they receive support even though there was a divide in race?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's one that we can't entirely answer because we don't know enough about about sort of white people in Chatham in that period. We know what we know is from the newspaper. We know that that there were large crowds that were coming out to see the games. And we know that there were something like 6,000 people who came out to the championship parade when the team came back from Guelph, where they had won the final championship game. They came back and there was a large crowds there. The mayor gave a speech, councilors gave a speech. So there was certainly at official level, certainly recognition. Whether or not there was still resentment within the community about them, we don't know that because all we know is what's in the paper. But certainly we know that there was some support, but we don't know how widespread it was. But certainly it's significant that it came from the mayor and it came from community leaders. So that is, that's significant in itself. In terms of afterwards, yes, you really notice it the year after they won the championship, because then community leaders and business people came out and actually put their money where their mouth was and actually put money into the team, which they hadn't done earlier. And so that was significant, got them into a, again, that more competitive league. I talked about the Western Counties Baseball Association. It's made up of teams from Middlesex County, Lambton County, and Kent County. So that was a big time. That was a big sort of Premier League of Southern Ontario. So that support did come forward in 1935. It kind of waned by the end of the 30s. There were lots of issues, difficulties the team was having financially, and I think some of that support waned by the end of the 30s. But certainly it was there, and we can sort of measure it in some ways in the mid 1930s.
Hey, Elias.
Seeing no further questions, I want to take this opportunity to thank you, Miriam, for getting up early this morning and joining us. It's unfortunate that we weren't here live. We give you a little gift of appreciation. I want to thank you very much for taking your time and letting us know about this important part of our history, and especially the Chatham area. So thank you very much on behalf of the club.
Okay, thank you so much. And I really appreciate this opportunity to speak with you all.